Hello everyone.
Καλημέρα σας.
Hello everyone.
Good morning, everyone here.
Hello everyone. Hi everyone.
Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone.
Hello to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Dzień dobry.
Hello.
Einen wunderschönen guten Morgen.
C'est un plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui.
Hyvää huomenta.
We are happy that today, in the spirit of European Union, we will work together, share our creativity and ideas, and define our future development.
As one of the EU pioneers said, our compatriot Altiero Spinelli in the Ventotene Manifesto of 1931, the moment has arrived in which we must know how to discard old burdens, how to be ready for the new world that is coming. Among the old, the inept must be put aside, and among the young, new energies are to be stimulated. This is why, as young citizens of Europe, we have become aware of the reasons behind the present crisis in Europe and in the entire world, so that we can begin to build a new future and a new Europe for us and the generations to come.
May I finish by quoting Ulster's first Irish president, Mary McAleese, who reminded us to continue building bridges. And therefore I offer you all, on behalf of my generation of hope, the example of Ireland to Europe, of the healing, growth and strength that we can have as long as we continue to ensure that hope bridges our differences. Gur míle maith agat.
As we talked about Brexit, we know that Brexit will have a great impact in the economics of the EU. And in what ways would you say that Europe is trying to patch that? Would you say that the Mercosur and Europe Free Trade Agreement might be a way to try to cover the hole left by the UK? Thank you.
Many of us, especially in Ireland, are worried that because of the decision of the United Kingdom, that other countries around Europe might want to leave as well, which would not only be detrimental for Ireland and for Europe, but also for the world. What do you think needs to change about the European Union to ensure its future and that this doesn't happen?
Now that we're in the post-Brexit period, we have many dissatisfied people, many of whom are Scottish. And I want to ask you, in your opinion, is there a chance of Scotland joining the EU as a member state in the near future? Thank you.
As you most likely know, many banks that have a huge impact on the financial world and are based in London. And I would like to ask you, is it important for the Commission and in general the Union to make any effort to bring these banks back to European territory?
For a long time now, English has been our main language, but some people might think it's a little bit strange that English will still be our main language when the country isn't even part of the EU anymore. Do you think this main language will change in like 10 or 20 years? Thank you.
I would like to ask, what do you think about the problem with Kosovo and the integration with Serbia into the EU? How would you approach the problem? Thank you.
In Europe, especially many EU members have really strong automotive companies. And fighting climate change, how will we prevent an economic loss and without losing more member states?
First motion today that we find is that the need for an EU-wide education program to help raise awareness and drive people to take action on climate change and the environment. So 25% of the European Union budget has been agreed to be spent on climate action initiatives, and we think that it is important that people that this money goes towards educating people about the environment so that they know how important this issue will be and how it will affect the lives of children. and the next generations. We think that we need to teach people from a younger, encourage member states to integrate teaching children from a younger age, as it will help encourage parents and shape parents' attitudes as they see how their children become concerned about what their future has holds and how they should personally be trying to address issues of climate change. As at the end of the day, it will affect not just our generation, but subsequent generations. This program should outline how people can personally limit their energy usage. We need to encourage more pragmatic and eco-friendly attitudes towards how we personally use our personal energy consumption. For example, minimizing the amount of unnecessary electrical devices, turning lights off, encouraging things like this that otherwise wouldn't be at the forefront of people's minds.
The problem that we've dealt with is to draw a line between freedom of thought and expression and the crime of slander and propaganda. The freedom of expression is a principle which is enshrined in all constitutions as the foundation of democracy. The right to freedom of expression has proclaimed for the first time in the United Nations in 1948, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But when has this freedom got to be restricted thanks to development of new technologies or increasingly widespread use of internet, and also because of social networks? And sometimes people find themselves as the subject of fake news or misinformation, and so therefore freedom of expression is sometimes permitted in an almost unlimited way. But this has to be also reconciled with the right to private life and privacy, right to private life and dignity.
Je passe la parole à ma copine.
So our committee has 4 proposals to put forward today. Firstly, we propose to the extension of the current laws in place in France and Germany to all member states, applied not in the form of a directive, but as an actual law with similar financial and criminal penalties. Secondly, EU funding in certain areas should be conditional on the member state abiding by the rule of law on which the European Union is founded. Thirdly, the creation and implementation of a thorough education programme to inform citizens in a more definite way of their rights and on the line between freedom of expression and hate speech. And lastly, the formation of an EU diplomatic mission to help secure against political external threats peacefully. Thank you.
The first of our propositions would be the legalisation of cannabis and marijuana. And this is to prevent the dangers of people buying it from drug dealers. This would fund criminality, especially terrorism. And the legalisation of cannabis would allow the government to regulate the levels of THC and CBD, which would make it safer for users overall and prevent other chemicals being mixed into the substance, therefore making it safer for the consumer. As we have found in countries that have already legalised cannabis, cannabis use actually decreases when it is legalised, so it would be better for the country and it becomes less attractive. Also, it discourages people from trying harder drugs. So in countries where you have legalisation already, it is often that you have much lower levels of overdoses from deaths. Our next point is education. So we would like to roll out an EU-funded programme where classes where risks, whether it be legal, medical or sanitary, are discussed with specialists, but also ex-addicts to give real-life advice and experience on the topic. It would be included in a larger programme, so things to do with real life, such as, I don't know, paying taxes, and that are really applied to our everyday life that we all experience, that we'll all share in as EU citizens to break a stigma. And this would include practical tips that are age-appropriate education. Often in countries where drugs are illegal, people are afraid when they see people overdose or people that are in need of help, and they don't call the relevant medical attention because they're afraid of the legal consequences, whereas people need to have the confidence that nothing will happen to their friend if they do call the police.
Should we not be afraid that by legalizing cannabis, we will also see an increase at the number of people using it?
This is a legitimate concern, but it has been found in countries such as, well, the Netherlands, that it has slightly decreased, and it makes it less attractive because sometimes people want to do it just because it's illegal and not because they actually want to do this drug. It is more because it's illegal or edgy.
We have 5 solutions, and they go as follows. Number 1, that there should be an entire ban on plastics in the European Union to take place after a transition period of 10 years. Number 2, that there should be greater cooperation between EU member states in the future, for example, on the area of crime. Number 3, that there should be a plan on how any future withdrawal from the European Union shall work in order to avoid a repeat of the last 4 years. This plan should include a criteria and procedure on how the divorce deal should be reached, trade deals and issues of foreign nationals, for example. Number 4, that there should be a criteria for nation states wishing to join the European Union, and that it should be a necessary condition that all territorial disputes that these nation states are engaged in are settled in advance. And finally, number 5, that there should be increased centralisation of the European economy in the long term. Garmagov.
I was wondering, what would you do with the plastic sector and economy, because plastic and everything is a huge sector where thousands, maybe millions of people work with. And second question, how would you compete against, for example, China, which makes so cheap plastic, and you have to switch it for like paper, which is way more expensive?
Okay, thank you. I'll answer the second question first on the issue of competition. A very similar argument was made when the European Union decided to introduce GDPR to the European Union. Oh, we'll be far behind America and the other countries, and they'll have free data and we won't, and so on. Whereas, in actual fact, the world has followed the European example. So I'm sure the world would follow the European example on this as well. On the first issue, what would happen to the workers? It's the same with other environmental areas. What would happen to the miners and people that work in oil areas? Alternative employment, green energy, alternative forms of plastic. We're going to need to find a substitute for plastic. So workers would be needed in that area. Thank you.
Education, adaptation and movement. I would like to begin with movement, as it's the first stage of the process and arguably the biggest problem on how we can move people legally as well as safely. What was proposed was a system of boats which prevent migrants risking their lives crossing the Mediterranean in, quite frankly, feeble boats, and it also offers a safe means of travel into Europe whilst also offering potential to move into Northern Europe. It was also suggested that with regards to land borders, that we reinforce these borders with a NATO force. NATO have a long history of peacekeeping missions, most notably in Africa, and I am sure that their competence is guaranteed. Next, the process is distribution. What we proposed was a new, more efficient commission that deals with the distribution of migrants across the whole of Europe without splitting up families. It was highlighted to me that this is a prime opportunity for unity within Europe, as every country will be accepting migrants in the fairest way based off size of economy and ability to deal with mass flow. This is most likely aimed at the fact that economies are much larger in the west of Europe than in the east. Next, there was education, and being from Northern Ireland myself, I know how education can be key to getting rid of bigotry. We said that there should be a new commission that works with local governments to implement new education processes instead of working with NGOs who aren't legally binded and have abused European funding for migration. Currently, the EU has a budget of €6.6 billion for integrating asylum seekers and migrants. Learning the language of the countries that they plan to settle in was another big point that we raised. We then thought this should be followed up by thorough education into professions like medicine and technology, which will allow migrants to give back to the country that they are being welcomed into.
Does the Council think that the EU plays a role in preventing migration from countries that are currently involved in refugee crises in the first place? Quite often, European countries have been involved in the past with exporting arms to countries with less than stellar human rights reputations in the Middle East. I'm not going to name names for fear of persecution. But currently, we've got waves of migrants queuing up to ambush the walls of the Spanish colony of Melilla, coming from Africa and the Middle East, all because wars are raging using weapons manufactured in the US, UK, and EU.
Thank you, but I think that is quite a narrow view on it. Well, obviously, you've got one aspect of the migration crisis, which is war, but you also have to deal with the economic side, people seeking refuge in countries due to the ability to get jobs. I can't note on the EU funding any external paramilitaries or whatever you were alluding to in foreign countries, as there is no army within the European Union. Each state has their own army. And so, yes, we need to look at the broader aspects of the migrant crisis and not just specifically war-torn areas. Thank you.
So firstly, financial. We suggest to EU member states to consider offering low-interest college tuition loans, like HLAs in Britain. Why? Because many talented or low-income people cannot pay for the tuition for the jobs they want. Secondly, expand and invest further in Erasmus Intern. It is a database of companies that you can apply to for internships. As I said, internships leads to experience, and experience leads to greater employability. Apologies, 1 second. We asked member states to further fund in organizations like the IDA. The IDA is a state organization in Ireland that built a lot of business parks with good infrastructure like broadband. What occurred was the retention and attraction of large corporations moving to rural areas. Many of youths who live in rural areas suffer greatly from unemployment. Thus, attracting corporations to rural areas will do a great deal to reduce youth unemployment. My second topic is education. Suggest member states reform state exams and school curricula to foster and take into account creativity, job seeking and applications, and knowledge of labour rights. Why? Because many leave secondary school not knowing the simple things like how to write a CV or curriculum vitae, as well as creativity and individuality increases employability as one can think fast and adapt. We would like to ask the EU to give awards or certificates to companies who take significant strides in training and taking on interns or those who seek work experience. Why? As I said before, because greater experience leads to greater employability. We want to give the youth the tools to end unemployment as much as we can. Suggest a separate schools for practical trade work or jobs instead of typical academic secondary schools, e.g. building, carpentry and hairdressing. Many of those unemployed may not like to get a job in academic type jobs, and therefore a focused system on trade or practical work should reduce unemployment. Again, one example is LCA in Ireland. Finally, we would like to suggest, as a protection for the youth, an ombudsman for youth work in each member state, which would be regulated by the EU. This ombudsman would be able to receive anonymous reports of youth labour abuse. Many young people do not feel able to stand up for their rights to adult employers, and therefore we want to give them the tools to fix what's wrong in the workplaces without being able to be attacked by their employer or wrongfully fired. Thank you very much.